So today I thought I would share with you a little something that you might be wondering about. How did I come up with the idea for the Law of the Prince Charming story? That is a question that most people wonder about authors, and when they come out with a book, they're like, oh my gosh, where did that idea come from? And so I thought I would share with you today where this story came from, how this story came about. Different authors will give you different answers to this question. Most of the time my ideas come from movies or books or other media that I've seen that I either love the idea of and want to do my own version of that, or they did it so poorly and I think that I could do it better. This is going to be the former. A bunch of years ago, and I don't remember how long ago it was, I read a book by Mercedes Lackey. I have read a lot of Mercedes Lackey's books. I really just love her in general. But this particular book is Mercedes Lackey, the Fairy Godmother. And so the basic premise of this book is there's this young woman named Ella who is all set up to have a Cinderella tale happen to her. She has the evil stepmother, the bad sisters, and there's magic building up around her to try and help this tale happen, only things don't fall into place and she isn't a Cinderella. She doesn't go to the ball, she doesn't meet a prince. Which basically means she has all of this magic that has built up around her, and that attracts a fairy godmother to come and talk to her and be like, look, you've got all this magic, I'm going to take you as my apprentice, and you're going to become a godmother. And that's basically what the story is. So it's Ella learning about how the tales all work with this force called the tradition, which tries to push all these tales to happen in the real world. And the godmothers know that this is happening. They know about all of the tropes, not that they call them tropes in the book, but basically, the fairy tale tropes. And so they try and guide the tales toward as happy a conclusion as they can come to with this tradition just trying to force these things to happen. And so I read that book and I was like, yes, I love the meta tales like that, the meta stories where it's like, we know what's going on and we respond accordingly. That just higher level of knowledge has always really interested me. And so I knew that I wanted to write a book like this, but I had no idea what the story was going to be. So I sat on it for a couple of years, and every once in a while I would go online and just read fairy tales. I would read them, and then I would forget about it for a while, and then I would read some. And so one day I came upon a tale called The Little Wild Rose. And it was just another tale, and I thought that it was a cute name, and I went in and I read it. It's pretty typical fairy tale fare in that there was an old couple, a man and a woman, who wanted a kid, but they were too old so they couldn't have one. And so the man went off to find a way to have a child, and he walked for a really long time, ended up in a forest, met an old wizard in a cave, and the old wizard was like, sure, take this apple, you and your wife each need to eat half of it, and then you'll get your child. And the old man was like, okay, cool. And he headed home, but of course he got hungry, and so he ate the whole apple himself. When he woke up the next morning, in the field next to him was a little girl. And she had beautifully blushed cheeks like the wild roses that were growing around there, and that's why she was named Wild Rose. And so the old man picked her up, and he carried her home, and he was going to go in and surprise his wife, so he put the Wild Rose into a barrel outside the house to go in and surprise his wife. And while he's inside, a giant eagle comes down and takes the barrel and takes the Wild Rose back to its nest in order to feed it to its babies. And then in also typical fairy tale fashion, the babies end up not eating the delicious flesh, and instead the giant eagle ends up raising the Wild Rose as one of the babies. And as soon as I read that, I was like, that giant eagle could be a griffin. I have a thing for griffins. I'm not sure you know I have a thing for griffins, but I have a thing for griffins. Yes, I have a thing for griffins. And it was with that, reading that particular fairy tale, that the entire story just kind of started to fall together in my head. I also knew that I wanted to play around with gender roles. I've always been a tomboy. I don't particularly like very many typically, traditionally feminine things. And so that's always just been a thing. This was one of my favorite books growing up, Alana, who has to dress as a boy in order to train as a knight, and then ends up like saving the kingdom and all that kind of good stuff. But yeah. So I knew that the Wild Rose, who is a girl in the original fairy tale, was going to be a boy. And I started out with writing a scene where Wild Rose goes to deal with a female Bluebeard. And I wrote for a little while, and the story just wasn't working. I had my general concept, but it wasn't really working. And then I ended up writing Tabitha. And the beginning of the novel itself that you read is very, very close to the original thing that I wrote, and that was how Tabitha came about. I didn't plan her in any way. I just started writing, and most of what you would see, if you read the first chapter, that is basically how I developed that character. I also happened to be reading Stephen King's On Writing for the first time, and I liked his wife's name, so that's actually why she's named Tabitha. But anyway, so that is actually where the idea for this story came from, was just reading that fairy tale, taking a whole bunch of different ideas that had been rattling around in my head and just sticking them all into one novel. Characters in this novel know that the fairy tales are happening. So Tabitha is a Prince Charming in this world where certain people know that these tales happen and make sure that they happen, because that's where the magic of the world comes from. And so this book follows Tabitha and Wild Rose and the Huntsman through a number of different tales as they have to navigate this world where the magic can just make you take on the roles in these fairy tales, often without you even realizing it. That is the story that I have written, and that's where some of the ideas came from. And if you are interested in reading that, I am posting it for free on Wattpad. It updates 3 days a week. I've got the text version. I also have a version where I read the text in basically this same format that you're seeing here. I am not a professional reader. I do an okay job. But if you like to listen to your stories as opposed to read them, I got you covered. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you're interested in reading my novel, The Law of the Prince Charming, there's a link down below. And thank you so much for spending some of your time with me today. Bye-bye.